So Vince Ciaramella has the honor of presenting the finale of season 4. This is our fourth year, September through May, with the 19th Century Baseball Speaker Series, which of course Bob Bailey initiated and got it rolling, and his idea of doing it, and it turned out to be a pretty good idea. So, anyway, I'm not going to prolong this. I will say one thing. Tomorrow at midnight local time, your local time, is the deadline to send in for season 5 of the 19th Century Baseball Speaker Series. So if you have an abstract, make sure you get it in by midnight tomorrow. I've been looking. We've been looking over some of the abstracts that have been arriving. They're pretty good. So I think it'll be another good season. This is a fascinating topic. I'm not going to say too much about it, but it is death by drinking seawater. It's really true. And I want to turn it over to Bob Bailey for now, and he'll give you some ground rules, and we'll get started. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. The usual things apply. Please mute yourself when the speaker starts his talk. If you have a question, please use the chat function. Run your cursor along the bottom. The chat icon should show up. Just click on it, and a little box on the right-hand corner will show up. You type questions and comments through there. If you don't have a chat icon, go to the right before it says end, hit more, and when you more will have the chat function on it. And we can't have questions during the time because the speaker can't follow the chat because he'll be full screen with his slide. Let me introduce our speaker. Tonight's speaker is Vincent Ciaramella from Pittsburgh, a native and a lifelong educator. He teaches psychology in Pittsburgh. And he has researched and written about 19th century and early 20th century baseball in the area and beyond. He's the author of Jack McClellan, The Pride of Pittsburgh, Greats in the Graveyard, and Never Heard of Him, which is 12 Tales from Pittsburgh's Baseball Past. In addition, he has contributed almost a dozen articles and biographies to SABR's Bio Project, and is a board member of the Negro League's Memorial Marker Project. Tonight's presentation is Death by Drinking Seawater. It's probably more lighthearted than the title sounds, but nevertheless, it's the short, tragic life and career of Tom O'Brien. So, Vince, if you want to bring your slides up now, if you'll hit share screen at the bottom. There you go.
Let me get from the beginning. Let's see.
And then just go to full screen.
All right. It's been a while since I messed with Zoom.
Okay.
There you go.
Take your cursor. There you are. Magic. Yep. We're ready to go.
All right, everybody. Happy Tuesday, everybody. And thanks for jumping in. I know, Tuesday night can be Taco Tuesday too. So I hope, maybe you got a belly full of goodness and are ready to hear probably one of the most bizarre stories in baseball history. Death by Drinking Seawater, the short life and career of Tom O'Brien. I took the tragic out because I don't want to sensationalize it too much because he did have a pretty normal life, well, kind of up until the end when, things kind of just went sideways for him. So real quick about myself, Bob was really nice enough. He basically gave you my bio. Let me just give you just a quick story about how I got into researching not only him, but some of the other guys from Pittsburgh. So we all know what happened in 2020, right? The world gets shut down. There's tons of free time on our hands. Pittsburgh didn't have as severe lockdowns as some other places. So about 2 weeks in, there's like go outside, but just keep social distancing. So my wife's son and I, we first went to the park near our house, and the park is usually somewhat crowded, it was like Woodstock. Like there was just tons of people there. My street, which is a pretty quiet suburban street, looked like Bourbon Street or like Beale Street in Memphis. You know, there was just people everywhere. So I'm like, man, where am I going to go? Okay, cemeteries. They have tons of roads, right? You know, and I lest the lest the dead rise. I think I'm going to be okay. You know, and you know, I don't have to fear COVID from the people taking a permanent dirt nap in the graveyard. So anyway, we started walking cemeteries, and at first I felt weird going just to walk cemeteries. So I just started looking for my family members at first and did my genealogy, but the road ran out pretty quickly with that. I'm like, well, I love baseball, Mike, and my great grandfather's buried near Put Galvin. I'm sure if you're a fan of the 19th century baseball genre, you know him. He was the first 300 pitcher to throw 300 games or win 300 games, and he's got some other titles as well. But he's buried not too far from my great grandfather. So we found him. We found Greenfield Jimmy Smith and somebody else I can't remember. And I'm like, well, we can start finding baseball players, and that's how it began. So Greats in the Graveyard, the book, was just basically a kind of a memoir of our summer that year visiting cemeteries. We found over 186 players from the major leagues, the Negro leagues. We found umpires, front office people, sports announcers, sports writers, anything to do with Major League Baseball in Pittsburgh we wrote about. And we wrote a book called Greats in the Graveyard. Each chapter is a cemetery, and it's basically built as a walking tour. So if somebody like, let's say, Peter came to Pittsburgh and, I don't know, wanted to go see some of these guys, he's buried in St. Mary's Cemetery, Tom O'Brien. You could open up to that chapter, and it's a walking tour, and you can see all the people that are buried there, and there's little bios about them. Not super in depth, but just enough to kind of wet somebody's whistle and go, oh, that's pretty interesting, or hey, I want to read more about them. While researching the book, and researching the players, I came across Tom O'Brien, and I had to say, whoa, this is weird. This guy drank seawater and died. I'm like, wait, how did that happen? It sounds like something like a castaway dies from, somebody lost at sea. So I started thinking, okay, well, I'll just check out SABR's site. Maybe there's a bio about him, and there wasn't. So I thought, okay, this is my calling now, is to write his bio, and I did, and I had a blast, and I'm going to share it with you and his story. So let's begin. So here's my little objectives for tonight. So we're going to discuss the life and career of Tom O'Brien. I'm also, you can't talk about his life without talking about his tragic end, because really that's the big part of his story. And I want to dispel one myth about Tom O'Brien that does pop up from time to time when he is mentioned. Again, he's not mentioned much, but when he is, I see something that sometimes kind of leaks in, and I'm just going to throw it out there to correct that for the public record. As he said, I think Bob or Peter said, I can't see the chat. So at the end, if anybody wants any questions at the end, I will answer them to the best of my ability. And, hopefully you guys walk away here with some fun knowledge and a fun evening. So here's the story. I love baseball. I think we all do. We wouldn't be sitting in here at, 8:15 at night listening to some dude from Pittsburgh with a funny mustache talk about a guy that died, about 123 years ago. Everybody loves different aspects of baseball. I have tons of friends that love baseball, and they're into ERAs, or they're into RBIs, or they're into pitching history. Everybody's got their niche. Growing up on a steady diet of unsolved mysteries and In Search of with Leonard Nimoy, I think I kind of polluted my psyche as a kid, because I like the bizarre stuff, the stories that are just a little off center and a little out there, and no total pun intended, out there in left field. So I kind of put together a little who's who of some of my favorite bizarre stories in baseball. Maybe you've heard of some of these, maybe you haven't. One of them is a guy named Dude Esterbrook. You guys, anybody ever heard of Dude Esterbrook? Yeah. Well, if you haven't heard of him, he got traded from New Orleans to Baltimore and decided to walk there, which I thought was pretty cool. The kind of he was Forrest Gump before there was Forrest Gump. Then there's Gabby Street. He decided, hey, I'm going to catch a ball drop from the top of the Washington Monument, all 555 feet down. You can read about him. It didn't end all that great, and people try to replicate it, and it's never really ended up well for anybody. But Gabby Street, that's what he's famous for. Probably this one here, I think, is one of the more crazier stories. Minor league player, guy named James Phelps from Raysville, Louisiana. So he's out in the outfield. He's going back to catch it. I guess the back of the outfield was a little swampy. He steps back here, and lo and behold, a water moccasin bites him right in the leg. And he gets out, plays the rest of the game. His leg swells up, and he dropped dead the next day. I'm thinking that's commitment right there. He went right to the end. And weirdly, in that article that I found a few years earlier, another player died the exact same way at the exact same ballpark. So I'm hoping that if that place is still out there, they've got that under control. Maybe have kind of cleaned it up a little bit. Out here in Pittsburgh and Exhibition Park, we used to get Lake Dreyfus out in I think it was the right field. It would flood, but we didn't really have water moccasins. So, bully for us. Out of all those stories, though, Tom O'Brien is my absolute favorite of the weird stories. And this is the only, there's 2 known photos of Tom O'Brien. Well, there's some pictures in the paper, but that are in really good quality. This is the famous portrait most people see when they look on Baseball Ref or on SABR's site or anything. So real quick, I don't know if you've ever wondered, where are they from, and where do they exist in the world today? Well, there's only one copy of this picture, and it's here in my office with me. So I own this now. So if you ever want to know where the famous Tom O'Brien portrait is, it's in Pittsburgh, PA, in my office. And when I'm teaching, I sometimes stare at it. So there it is right there. That's Tom O'Brien's famous photo. If you research 19th century baseball, you've probably come across this this kind of realization. Accuracy in recording historical records wasn't somebody's trying to get in here. Mike Bass. All right, Mike, you're in. All right. Accuracy in recording information wasn't always precedent. I'm sure you guys have written for, SABR or read stuff, and you'll run across this a lot. There's a lot of conflicting information, especially guys who were born, about the early to middle 19th century and on. The record keeping was real spotty at that. We do know Tom O'Brien was born on February 20th, 1873. That is absolutely true as far as we know. However, if you look on Baseball Ref or on SABR or on some other sites, he's always listed as born in Verona, PA. Verona is a suburb of Pittsburgh. It's a city to itself, but it's just outside of the city of Pittsburgh. That's kind of half true. He was born near there, but not particularly in Verona. If you look at the earliest records, he was born in Clarksville in Allegheny County, which should be a pretty straightforward thing. But when I started, because I'm a lifelong resident, and I'm like, where the heck's Clarksville at? I'm like, and the more I researched it, the more I came to the conclusion that Clarksville never really fully existed as a real town. It was more probably just a local name for a coal patch town, and I'll show you why. Here's some maps I found. And I did some superimposing over modern maps, and I highlighted, you can see where it says J. Clark, that's property owned by him. And on the right side, it's a more detailed map. You'll see it says J. Clark. There's a road running through that. And those squares are little homes right there. If you look to the right of that, you'll see it looks like J.B. Ritter, but underneath it says company store. As a history teacher, and you can see there's railroad tracks right there. Well, this is all indications. This was probably a patch town somewhere, and it was probably just called Clarksville locally, but not officially. Jay Clark may have owned a small mine, and they just called it Clarksville, and these are probably just clapboard houses, or salt box houses as we call them around here. But it doesn't exist today, so there's no Clarksville today. And in another article, the obituary post published posthumously, obviously after he passed away, the article states that he was born in Frankstown. And again, we run into this problem. Again, there is no official Frankstown in this area. Now, there's a Frankstown Avenue in Verona, but there's no Frankstown. So Frankstown may have been, again, just a local name for like a neighborhood or a bunch of houses. It said that, he got his start on the sandlots on 2nd Avenue. But really, for all intents and purposes, he's from the Verona area. Where exactly, we'll never know, but that's okay. His life, like most 19th century players, it's hard to trace. I mean, he never married. As far as we know, he never had any children. His brother kind of pulls a Judge Crater. Like, I tried to track him through history. He just often disappears. So there's really nobody around left to go interview or try to track down long, descendants today. There isn't anybody. So his life pretty much is pre-baseball life is just wrapped up in a few documents, what we just saw, and that's all we know about him. And, again, researching for SABR and doing other 19th century guys, this is rather common. I just finished up a guy not too long ago named Charlie Fisher, who was the only player buried in Alaska. So if you want to know how many players are buried in Alaska, one. And his life, that bio was heck to untangled, but there's almost nothing about him except for a little bit about baseball. His life prior to the game and after the game is kind of a mystery, but you can read that on your own. Anyway, so that's it for his pre-baseball life. That's all we know about him. But we do have a lot of information about him in the 19th century in the world of baseball. I don't know how you guys are, but the one thing that really attracts me to like the late 19th century into like the early 20th century, pre-World War II, is the plethora of leagues out there, besides the majors. You got all these little, all these, Class A, Class B, Class C, Class D leagues all over the nation. I think it just adds to the flavor of the game, and it adds to it just interests me to no end when I'm researching guys, because I come across these now defunct leagues and these teams that are long gone, and then it sends me down a rabbit hole of researching them. So, when I got into really researching baseball players, of course, I eventually stumbled upon the Iron and Oil League, which was big in this area. If you don't know the history of this area in Pittsburgh, in Western Pennsylvania, Colonel Drake discovered oil at Drake's oil well. That was where oil was first discovered here in the United States. Not really discovered, but first kind of brought up on the ground on purpose. And Native Americans were using it long before that. But Drake's oil well is located about 100 miles north of Pittsburgh. And of course, the city's called Oil City, and there's Titusville next to it. Titusville is actually where the oil derrick is at, but Oil City's right next to it. So anyway, the Oil City and the awesome name, the Oilers, played in the 1894 Iron and Oil League. So being a nerd for all things Pittsburgh, when I started researching Tom O'Brien, I realized he had a crossover with the guy I wrote about right before him, Bobby Cargo. That's Bobby Cargo right there. Cargo is also a Pittsburgh guy, and I also wrote about him. He was the second SABR bio I wrote, and he's a graveyard neighbor of Tom O'Brien. They're buried maybe less than 100 feet apart. So, I thought that was pretty interesting that they both played. And both guys would go on to have very short lives, but that's another story for another day. So O'Brien started out, with the Oil City Oilers, and then he bounces around through different leagues, the Canton, Ohio team and the Interstate League, Newcastle and the Newcastle Quakers. Here's the Canadian angle I promised all my Canadian friends in the room tonight. So 1896, O'Brien makes the papers, but not for the reason you really want to make the papers as a baseball player. You want to be like the home run king. You want to be the guy that drives in that final run. No, 1896, he's playing for the Toronto Canadiens, or the Albany Senators of the Eastern League, with former Pirates manager Al Bruckenberger. So the team's out in Wilkes-Barre. It's if you've ever watched the show The Office, the American show The Office, Scranton, Wilkes-Barre are in the same area, northeastern Pennsylvania, for those of you who don't know PH geography. Anyway, he's up there playing a game, enjoying himself. Game ends, and oh boy, he gets arrested by a detective named Kavanaugh from New York, saying, "Hey, you're under arrest. You kidnapped the girl, Nora O'Neill." And O'Brien is shocked. He's like, I don't know this person. So he gets hauled up to Rochester, New York, and thrown in the slammer, along with another O'Brien. You can read about that in the bio if you want a deeper dive into this. Anyway, he gets thrown in the slammer until things get cleared up. So here's the story. Nora's father heard that she was kidnapped or ran away with a ball player named O'Brien, and she ran away to the States. That's what he heard. He was a restaurateur from Toronto. Well, it turns out the story got all muddled and confused. So first of all, the newspapers reported there was a 15-year-old girl. She was actually 17. What happened was she ran away from home, and she ran away and lived at a home for wayward women, and then became a domestic hire for a family living in Rochester. So she heard about this in the newspaper, that these two ball players, were arrested for apparently kidnapping her. So she goes to the police station. She goes, I don't know these guys. I don't follow baseball. I don't know any O'Brien. I left on my own volition. So Tom O'Brien escapes, to play another game another day. It wasn't him, but that's his one and only time he had a run-in with the law. And that's another thing you find a lot of these 19th century guys like Bobby Cargo. There always seems to be like a, a component where law enforcement gets involved. But again, it's another story for another time. So in 1897, O'Brien is now playing for the Baltimore Orioles. And this is where he's playing alongside Willie Keeler, Huey Jennings, and John McGraw. This is probably my favorite season for Tom O'Brien when I was doing the research, just because this is, I think, is where he shined the most. As the season progressed, O'Brien was a utility player. He played everything in his career except for pitcher and catcher, and he was good at most. Shortstop, he had a little bit of problems with, but like he was basically great at every, or let's say great's a little, he was good at every position, better in some than others. So he's playing alongside these greats, future Hall of Famers, for the Baltimore Orioles. Finishes up a season with a 252 batting average over 50 games. The Orioles that year, they didn't win. They didn't come in first. However, they came in second, but they won the very last Temple Cup, which I think is a pretty significant thing because there was only, 4 of them. O'Brien didn't really add a lot to that series, the end of the Temple Cup series, but his contributions are small. But I guess it's like, every dollar helps type thing. He scored a run in the second game, no runs in the third game, and 2 runs in the final game of the series, which again all added to the totality of the Baltimore Orioles won the 4th and final Temple Cup. And I don't know, I'm sure you guys in here, there's probably some of you in here like me are collectors of memorabilia. Obviously I showed you the O'Brien picture. The only official official collectible that ever came out that O'Brien is featured on is a Pepsi pin from that year, and there it is right there. And there's the Temple Cup for those of you who aren't familiar with it. That pin it's not super rare, but it's super expensive. I've got my eye on one on eBay, but I'm just going to try to wear the guy down eventually and see if I can get it for a little cheaper. But that's it. There's no ball card. There's no baseball card. There's no old Judge card. There's no T206. There's no, it's even later, but there's no tobacco card with him at all. This is if you want to collect Tom O'Brien baseball stuff, this pin or that picture that I have, which is a 1 of 1. So in 1898, he gets sold to the Pirates. He's back home. Again, the reporting back then is a little wonky. Some papers list he was sold for $2,500, and others it's $3,500. So it's one of the two. They just kind of volley back and forth in the papers between the both. O'Brien's back home, and that's to give you a little game flavor. He had some trouble at shortstop, as I said, with the Buccos, but finished the season, with shit's a little typo right there, but that's okay. 259 batting average with 53 runs scored. So in this year in 1899, he goes to spring training and he goes to Landis Studios in Roanoke, Virginia, and that's where this portrait is taken here, the famous portrait. So the auction house that I got it from, Heritage, they said that is the only known copy of it that they're aware of. So, maybe there's some floating out there. I like to think it's the only one, so that's if I ever had to sell my baseball collection of everything but keep one thing, that's the thing I'm keeping right there. It's just too cool. And my son thinks it's pretty awesome too. So it'll be his one day as well. So anyway, 1899, he's in spring training with the Bucks. But he's sold to the New York Giants and finishes out the 1899 season with the New York Giants. His final year in baseball is 1900. So we're at the very end of the 19th century. So, he just squeaks into our 19th century baseball, just under, he's still playing, right up to the very end. And I guess if it's going to be your last year in baseball, playing for your hometown and playing alongside Honus Wagner and Rube Waddell, I mean, that's as good as gold right there. And he did pretty well. He had a 290 batting average and was producing well for his home team. The newspapers loved him too. I just edited down to this quote here. There's a lot of stuff about O'Brien written this season, but I thought this was kind of poignant. Being a utility player, I mean, when I played baseball, I was a catcher. and I sometimes played left field. That was about it, but I mostly played catcher. Um, utility player. These guys are expected to be like masters of all these different positions, and they don't really have time to really study and become like a great center fielder or a great third baseman. They're kind of just bounced around. But O'Brien, rose to the challenge. Again, he had some issues with shortstop seemed to be his weakest link, but every other position he played, minus again, he was never a catcher or a pitcher. Everything else he seemed to be pretty good at. So, you know, if what's about to happen didn't happen, I think he would be. I'm again speculation, which I hate to do, but I'll do it now. I speculate that he'd probably be more well remembered by the Pirates if he had a couple more years to go under his belt. I don't think he would have been Honus Wagner or Roberto Clemente or Willie Stargell, but I think he'd be one of those guys that would pop up more in trivia questions about his playing than what exactly happened to him in life. So here's the unraveling of Tom O'Brien. It's October 1900, October 27th. So he boards the steamship Havana along with 19 other ball players, and they're heading to Cuba to play some of the island's best. They never really all the articles written about it never elaborate who these other players are, meaning the Cubans. It just says Cuba's best. So whoever that is. So the players on board, you got Jesse Tannehill from Pittsburgh, Tom O'Brien, and another name, Kid Gleason. I'm sure all you baseball historians out there know about Kid Gleason. I don't need to dive into his history, but they're all on board the ship, and it's a paddle wheeler. They're a steamship, and they're heading down to. They leave New York and they're heading to Havana, Cuba. I don't know if the seas were rough or just these guys just didn't, they weren't out on the water much. But out of the 20 players on board, 18 of them got violently ill. They started, they got seasick. They were, not to be gross, but they were thrown up over the sides. All except Tom O'Brien and Kid Gleason. They seem to be okay, but they're watching their teammates, just get sick left and right. Brian's a young guy. I don't know what was going through his mind at the time, but a little light bulb went off, and he thought, if we purge our systems, we could be in tip-top shape as well. So Brian and Kid Gleason, they lower a bucket over the side of the ship and pull up a bucket of seawater. So Kid Gleason, as the article said, he drinks just a little bit of it. Not a lot, just a little bit. But all the articles I read, O'Brien just guzzled the rest of it. How big was this bucket? I have no clue. But, we all know, the water everywhere, not a drop to drink, if you've ever been out at the sea, So O'Brien basically, this was the dumbest thing he could have done. So he guzzles seawater. And he gets the effects he wants. He gets sick, but he gets really, really sick. So both players are now violently ill. Gleason, who only drank a little bit of it, became mildly ill, and he did bounce back by the time they hit Cuba. O'Brien, on the other hand, was just a hot mess. He suffered violent retching fits of puking. He was bedridden. He gets to Cuba. He can't even get out on the land. He's still on the boat. And 2 weeks later, they're shipping him back to the United States. This guy is just not improving at all. So he finally lands in New York. He goes to the hospital, and at the time, again, medicine is what it is in the 19th century. The doctors gave him I call it the Horace Greeley cure, the go west, young man. Go out to the desert, get your heart. The dry air will be great for your lungs and heart. So that's what he hears in New York, but he wants a second opinion. So he comes back to Pittsburgh. Mercy Hospital, which is still here in Pittsburgh. Mercy was run by the Sisters of Mercy. He comes back, and basically the doctors there give him the same diagnosis. Yeah, you need to go out like Arizona or California, just dry out, let your heart and lungs rest and get yourself back in shape. So he goes, before he leaves for Arizona, he goes back to his mother's house. His father at this point has passed away. I've been looking. I'm pretty sure his father's buried in the same plot with his wife and with Tom, but I can't find a death certificate, and he just again kind of vanishes. So his father at this point is out of the picture, and his brother again, is like DB Cooper. Who knows where he went? He's gone out of the picture as well. His mother is an invalid at this point, so she's living in Verona. He goes back to visit her, tells her, "Hey, look, I'm heading out west. I'm going to be fine. I just need to convalesce out here, and I'll be back before the season starts." Okay, so he heads out to Arizona. So around December, he wrote a letter from Prescott, Arizona, to the Pirates saying, "Hey, look, my health is improving. I did have this like violent, hemorrhaging on the train ride to Arizona, but by all counts, I'm getting a lot better." So by January 1901, we roll into the 20th century, and there's really no indication that Bryant's not going to be back, for spring training. By the way he's writing letters, you think like, wow, this guy's going to come back in even better shape than he was the previous season. He's like, I'm ready to go. He's telling, these letters, I'll be back. I'm going to be my best. That really wasn't the case. February 3rd in Phoenix, Arizona, he dies from typhoid pneumonia, far away from home. And this is kind of where the story where I would say I'm going to dispel one myth. He didn't really technically die from drinking seawater. He died from typhoid pneumonia, but his immune system was so ravaged by, basically the self-inflicted poisoning that, his body, was susceptible to the disease. So he died in Arizona. His body was shipped back here to Pittsburgh. He belonged to a fraternal group called the Marquis Club here in Pittsburgh. His body was laid out at St. Joseph's in Verona. They did the mass there, and then they brought him back. They brought him to St. Mary's Cemetery in just outside of Lawrenceville in Pittsburgh, and that's where he's buried. His mother joined him a year later. She died just a few months later in 1901. So thus ends with the exception of Joseph, who knows where he went, the O'Brien line here in Pittsburgh. So again, if you ever do come to Pittsburgh, and I know it sounds kind of grim reaper and ghoulish, but again, walking these cemeteries and learning about these players is a great way to broaden your scope of knowledge when it comes to baseball. He's buried along with Bobby Cargo, Alexander Donahue, who had a really long career in baseball, I think about 17 seasons. Buck Sweeney, I wrote about him in Never Heard of Him, the book. Interesting guy, because I'm not even quite sure he ever played Major League Baseball. You can read the book and find out, but he is known for, he was very self-deprecating. He eventually made the Pirates, but as the equipment manager. And his other big claim to fame is when Honus Wagner's car got stolen in 1938. He was a motorcycle police officer, and he was the guy that got on the case for Wagner's missing car. And an umpire named John Lawler, who was, again, a 19th century umpire that only umpired a few major league games. So if you ever end up in Pittsburgh and you want to walk through, St. Mary's is kind of cool. It really does feel like a piece of the 19th century was ripped out and dropped into the 21st. It's between Children's Hospital and another bigger cemetery, but it's got brick roads. It just feels very out of sync with modernity. So in the end, with Tom O'Brien, as I said, he was a decent player. And I think that if this tragedy didn't happen, I think his story would have obviously been something different, but I think we would have known about him. Again, he might not have been, a player like Pie Traynor or somebody of that ilk, but he would have been somebody that we talk about more in Pittsburgh. Sadly, he's nobody really knows about him. He's kind of forgotten. And if they do run across them, it's always, hey, that's the dude who drank seawater. And like I said, I always got to correct that. Yeah, he did drink seawater, but he technically didn't die from it. That was the thing that led to him catching pneumonia. So that is my story of the short life and the short presentation of Tom O'Brien. And there's his tombstone right there. He's buried right next to his mother. And I want to thank Bob and Jonathan and Pete and everybody at SABR for giving me this chance to share this really kooky story with you. And I hope you enjoyed this trip down the bizarre 19th century rabbit hole. So, and here's to another season next year of great talks. Thank you very much.
Vince, thank you very much. If you would right now, if you'd take your slide down, just hit escape and you'll go out of the, there you go, and then take the slides out and we'll get back to everybody's picture on there. I have two there are no question, but I have two comments. One on St. Mary's. Somebody's having some respiratory issues.
Thanks, Ian.
The St. Mary's, there's actually 4 St. Mary's cemeteries in Pittsburgh. And if you don't know the address, don't go wandering through one that says St. Mary's and say you're going to find Tom O'Brien or Bobby Cargo. You got to know which one you're going to. And it's not easy. Some are dioceses cemeteries. Some are parish cemeteries, and they're all sorting them out. It's worse than trying to figure out St. Patrick's Cemetery in Boston. I think there's 7 of those in the metropolitan area.
Oh,
Nevertheless, you also mentioned. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
no, I was to say that when I was writing the book, I had to differentiate in the chapters because you're right. There are 4 St. Mary cemeteries, and so when you look in the book, it says St. Mary Lawrenceville, St. Mary's Troy Hill, because other words, one of the big head scratchers with one of the guys, his name was Jacob Surmer. He was always just listed as buried in St. Mary's, and I finally found him. He was the guy that played one game for the Pirates. He was a neighbor of the Pirates. He lived down the street, so they invited him to pitch because that happens all the time now, right? And yeah, he has more names in the newspaper. Like his names are all spelled differently. I finally found him in one of the St. Mary's under one of the names, but yeah, so it is a little confusing. But go ahead. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, you're Fred. The other was talking about the Iron and Oil League of the 1890s, and that was the only time the Iron and Oil League ran. Although there was some spotty in the early 20th century, some spotty years, but Oil City was the hometown of Guy Hecker, the pitcher for Louisville, and he played on the local teams before he joined the Louisville in 1882. So they had some organized baseball 10, 12 years before they were in the Iron and Oil League. How did the tour to Cuba get organized?
You know what? It's not abundantly clear. It just said they were sending some major leaguers down to the island. I never researched it beyond the Tom O'Brien angle of it. So that's a good question. I don't know. Just every article with that was he was one of the 20 major leaguers chosen to represent the United States against the island's best. And that's kind of all I know about it. But it's one of those things that be a great topic for somebody else to research exactly how that happened.
Who made the choice? Who was there a leader? Somebody put the money up to send them down there?
You know, I hate to say it. I hate to give you two. Like, I'm not really sure. I don't remember off the top of my head. But yeah, I think it was New York. I want to say it was New York was the kind of the hub of this. Like maybe the Giants. You know, it's kind of like where it was rooted around. Put the money up. But I have my notes deep in a Google Drive somewhere. So I'm sure it's sitting there somewhere. But yeah, no, I mean that's the thing about researching, 19th century, just baseball in general. Like how many avenues can you take? Like the Tom O'Brien story, and again, like you just said, you could research how did these people get picked for the team, to go play the Cubans, or all the other people involved in Kid Gleason, he's tied in with obviously, the Sox scandal later on. So it's just interesting. There's so many ways you can, so that's what I think baseball is so fascinating. How many different avenues you can check out with that. But yeah, O'Brien was, I guess he's still probably my favorite guy that I've written about. I got one in the pipeline right now for Algie McBride. He was a Cincinnati Red, not to give too much away. I didn't really know much about him. I found another, like a picture like Tom O'Brien. I found Algie's cabinet photo for sale, so I bought it, and I just liked his name. And it turns out he was a player that was hurt a lot. That was really about his only claim to fame. He was sort of interesting. Not my favorite guy to write about, but I think he turned out to be pretty good. So look for that. I'm sure it'll be in the SABR newsletter probably in about a month or so. We're kind of backed up on the bio project. There's a lot of people like right now, going through it. So I'd say probably by mid-June, early July, it'll be out if you want to read that one. But I have a lot out there. I do tend to see how I somehow always find a guy that has a really weird twist to his story, like Charlie Fisher, the only player buried in Alaska who may or may not have been who may or may not have been friends with Buffalo Bill in fighting out in the Indian Wars out in Montana.
Fisher did claim that he got to Alaska because he was hunting gold in the Yukon, and he was in the town of Eagle, which is where he died. Yep. And he was actually buried in a military cemetery that is now the public cemetery. I think it was Fort Waldo or something of that nature. But he played, I think, half a season with the Kansas City Cowboys in
Yeah,
1884.
11 games total. That was the entirety of his career. But I just find those guys fascinating. Like, really, up for him, there's no like real lead up to exactly how he got involved in Major League Baseball. So that's a mystery. I talked to Dave Nemec via email a couple of times, and we were both talking about him. Like, yeah, he's just kind of a mystery. It seems like his story is such a common name. It gets twisted with other fishers out there, and trying to untangle it it's a little bit of a game. But yeah, there's so many interesting people in baseball. I also put one out about a guy named Kathy Kiefer recently. If anybody's interested in that one, he was a pretty interesting guy too. So
Kiefer died in Kentucky in Hopkinsville, and he was
yeah,
buried at his hometown in Charleroi, Pennsylvania.
absolutely. His gravestone sunk. The graveyard to get to him is very hard to get to because it's up a dirt road that
straight up a hill.
Yep. He's with Claude Gouzet, the first French player, is buried in that cemetery. But the grave is sunk. So I'm working with the cemetery. We're going to try to pull it up and put a footer under it this summer because his military information that's listed on the gravestone is illegible because it's under the ground. And all his records, like most World War I records, burned up in the archive fire. I think it was in '73 in St. Louis. So his only military records on that stone in the ground. So we're going to try to pull it up and maybe get the local VFW to do a little rededication or something for him.
Very, very good.
So yes,
yes, go ahead, Vince.
Oh, I was going to say yes. I am the Grim Reaper of baseball. So there you go.
well, join the club. I've got a list of 14,000 burial locations of baseball related people.
Oh man.
And I published a book about 20 years ago with 8,000, but I've added to that over the years. But it's all sorts of things go on, and you just. I remember O'Brien was kind of hard times because he dies in Phoenix, but is buried back in Pittsburgh. But there's no, other than he was born there, you didn't know that he had connection because, as you say, there's not much genealogical history to go back and forth. And
right.
He popped up in St. Mary's. That's where I found him because
what book did you write?
Match the death date.
What was your book you said you wrote?
Baseball burial sites.
Nice. I'm about to look into that.
I had no idea.
20 years ago, though, so I doubt there's many of them floating around. Any other questions, gentlemen?
I just want to make a quick comment, Vince. I love it. I did the same thing that you did during the pandemic, and I was bored at work one day and just played around and found out there's 77 people in Buffalo, New York that had some kind of major league playing experience, and started to go around and find them, and started with Jimmy Collins, Joe McCarthy, Will White is in Buffalo. So it's just so cool. And then you find these, when you find them, you find these little tidbits. Like I remember finding somebody in Mount Hope Cemetery in Rochester who had Masonic symbols all over his gravestone. Found another one where it's, I don't know if you're probably aware of this, where you see the tree where it's cut like this. I don't know if you know what that means. I found out recently it's a life cut short, and there's a player who died in his 40s. So just awesome. Thank you so much for this. I didn't know I thought I was the only morbid one out there that was like, to me, it's kind of cool just to go to them. And I actually, going to go back and start leaving baseballs on their grave. So that's like a bucket list thing for me, to leave a baseball on every player's grave. So,
well, I see a guy named Andy's in the room with us. Andy's from Pittsburgh as well. And Andy's, we call ourselves dead ballers. We go out there and, so Dr. Fred Worth is a friend of mine too. So when he came to Pittsburgh, we actually beat his record. We found 67 people in one day. I already knew where they were at. So we just went over. Awesome. But it was fun. He told me stories about his travels. I mean, that guy's unstoppable. Like if I was ever trying to chase numbers, there's no way. He's like that guy that holds the records for eating Big Macs. Like, nobody's ever going to catch him, but
Fred has been at right around 10,000 baseball graves.
That's insane.
Jeez. Yeah, and actually back with Charlie Fisher real quick. So he said, and I don't know if I'll ever get there myself. Both of us are like, what's the chance? Eagle is like, it's not easy to get to. It's right like 5 miles from the Canada-U.S. border, near the Yukon River. And we're like, when are you ever going to be up there? So he contacted the local librarian, and she's going to go out sometime this summer when the snow is melted sufficiently. And she's going to go see if he has a stone. And two, like if he doesn't, they're going to mark it so we know where he's at if we ever decide to visit, or so he'll have that claim. So I'd like to go because I was a fan of the show Northern Exposure in the 90s. It's all things like, yeah, Canada and like Alaska. It sounds like fun. So why not? Maybe when I retire teaching. Oh no, Woody, that's the Gorn from the episode Arena from Star Trek, the original series. I got a big window there. I was telling them earlier. So I teach cyber school, and about noon, the light comes through it. My room starts looking this. I'm in a loft up here. The loft starts kind of looking like the Well of Souls from Raiders of the Lost Ark. So I had a Star Wars figure up there, but my cat decided to eat it, and he fell over during class one day. So my son bought me the big Gorn. He's 8 foot tall, and the cat was afraid of him. So I always tell my students, that's my co-teacher there. He's like, if you don't do your homework, he'll come collect it. So. But I just think it's a cool piece. They get something to talk about when they're 25 years from now, when they're at Applebee's at the reunion. Like, yeah, you remember that weirdo, that had that creature from the Black Lagoon or Lizard Man behind him. So, yeah, so that's my story. And I mean, I appreciate it. If I had time, I'd write another abstract. But maybe in 2026, I'll come up with another one with an interesting story for you guys.
That'd
So
be
I have
terrific.
other ones too. Yeah, I've got a few like kind of simmering in the crock pot upstairs, and right now I'm working with the Josh Gibson Foundation. We're marking Negro League players here in Allegheny County. We just got 2 put in yesterday. Frank Miller and what was the other one? Win Harris. Frank Miller. It's like the last time he played was like 1896 for the Cuban X Giants. He played in the 1887 the Keystones here in Pittsburgh. They only lasted for 2 weeks, and we also marked at one of the other players from that team, Dave Allen. And I don't want to spoil it, but I found something very, very interesting about Dave Allen that I think it's pretty cool for baseball. I mean, I as far as I know, this is a pretty unique story. But he's going to be in my new book, so maybe I'll talk about him when I come back next, in 2026. Maybe I'll do Dave Allen for that one, because the story it's worth telling because it's definitely unique in baseball. So.
Well, Vince, thank you very much. Very entertaining and very nice presentation. We appreciate your putting this together and being part of this. We wish you well, and we look forward to having you back another time. Peter, if you'd like to do our close.
Vince, it was even better than reading the abstract.
Thank you.
It was a very entertaining story. And you got to wonder about, had things, been a little bit different, had he not, weakened the system and ended up, dying of the pneumonia they gave as a cause of death, he probably would have gone, much deeper into the 20th century, probably another decade maybe. He certainly was playing on the right teams. It was kind of interesting. Those were good teams in those years. The New York Giants and the Pittsburgh Pirates. Okay, so if you're considering, Vince, you got 24 hours to get an abstract in for next year. So again, I want to mention that our deadline is tomorrow at midnight, your local time, to send in an abstract for our 19th Century Speaker Series, Season 5, which will be from September 2024 through May 2025. 9 presentations, all on Tuesday evenings. For those who cannot wait, June the 6th, coming up just in a few weeks, we have one of our 19th century book club presentations with Matt Albertson, who's a much better presenter than I am. And Matt will be doing a presentation on the 1880s style of baseball, a series of books written by Rob Bauer. And then later, I don't know where you went, Paul. Oh, there you are. On the 27th of June, Paul Langendorfer will be giving a presentation on the sequel to If I Never Get Back, which is a great 19th century baseball novel. And the sequel is Two in the Field. And the same author wrote, of course, the sequel a couple of decades ago. Okay, thank you all for joining in, and look for our newsletter in July, and you'll see the complete schedule for the next season 5 of our 19th Century Baseball Speaker Series. But thanks again, Vince. Nice, great job.
Good night, all.
Thanks,
Thank you
guys.
for coming.
Good night.
Good night.
Paul, I'm
night.
sending you a friend request on Facebook if you're on there, so.
I sure did. I already sent you one on to your author page.
All right, cool. Well, we'll get one from my private page. We can chat more. All right. See you around, buddy.
Love to do it. Take care.